for a meaty conversation. We're joined by Michael Kugelman, who needs no introduction. He is part of a very influential think tank, director of the South Asia Institute Wilson Center. He joins us from Washington, D.C. to look at the longer view. We have with us Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, and of course, Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. We're also going to be joined by Lieutenant General S.A. Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps of the Indian Army. And we also have with us Professor Walter C. Ladwig, Senior Lecturer, Associate Professor, International Relations at King's College London. Thank you all for speaking with me on the hard facts. And I want to begin first with Mr. Kugelman. Mr. Kugelman, obviously, there is going to be a lot of footage that is going to be put out now of the consequences of the Israeli counterstrike on Gaza. And it becomes very difficult to be objective about the bloodletting. Let's be honest. We're all humans first, and no one wants to see children in harm's way on either side of the border. Nonetheless, how far should Israel go, given that those pictures will be used now, obviously, to paint Israel as a villain? Is the target of reducing Gaza to a tent city a legitimate one?
Well, I mean, clearly, what Israel experienced on Saturday was indeed something that it has not experienced since it was founded. In terms of the number of people it lost in a single day, and what we've seen over Israel's history is a tendency to strike back very hard and oftentimes disproportionately when hit by terrorism. And given just how incredibly brutal and horrific these Hamas attacks were, we could assume indeed that Israel will hit back as hard as possible. And indeed, we don't know exactly what Israel is going to do, but there is talk about an actual ground invasion of Gaza, which could indeed be devastating for the Palestinian public, Palestinian civilians. Clearly, the goal must be to eliminate or at least reduce the capacity of Hamas to operate. But I think Israel is going to hit very hard, and I think at the end of the day, it may not be that sympathetic to pleas and concerns of the outside world about needing to be careful not to go too far, though I think it's clear that the U.S. and other key allies of Israel will try to urge Israel not to do anything that could be too excessive. But Israel is in a very tough spot. I mean, let's be very clear. What it experienced on Saturday was absolutely horrific, and one cannot blame it for wanting to respond as robustly as it likely will, even though there certainly are clear costs and risks that go beyond the large number of civilians that could be impacted if it were to go that far. But I think that at this point in time, its key allies, including the U.S., are fully behind it. That's an important consideration as well.
Well, let's be a little more specific, Mr. Kugelman, because yes, of course, Israel reserves the right to strike back and deep into Gaza and take out the Hamas. But I was sort of wanting to pick at a narrower seam, which is how far should Israel go? Should it go to its stated intent of reducing Gaza to a tent city? Is that a legitimate aspiration on its part? Target, mission, call it what you want.
No, I mean, that would not be a legitimate mission in my view. The notion of destroying Gaza, I mean, there's nothing legitimate about that. But look, Israel has a challenge that its main goal is to target Hamas. But as you know, the demographics and the geography of Gaza are such that it's very difficult to target Hamas without also impacting and hitting civilians. It's a very densely populated region, and Hamas knows that. It purposely surrounds itself, positions itself in places where it's impossible to get at it without also impacting and hurting civilians. So this is the tough spot that Israel faces, for sure.
Let me bring in Professor Ladwig, and after that, Kanwal Sibal to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. Professor Ladwig, can Israel the original victim here be villainized for securing its territorial integrity? Where you're speaking to us from, in London, there were a large number of protests against Israel by a large number of groups, of course, that led to a clash because there were pro-Israel groups that also showed up on the streets. And we saw quite the melee. Now, I want to ask you, is this creeping attempt by one side of the ideological divide to paint the original victim here as a villain, a legitimate one, or is it part of a propaganda that has had its day?
Well, the original question that you posed on what effect these images is going to have on public opinion around the world is really the heart of this. You know, in the last several years, Israel has been strengthening its geopolitical position through a series of normalization efforts with many of its Middle Eastern neighbors. There are some who suggest that following the Abraham Accords, that one of the key motives behind this Hamas attack, if Iran is really a patron in it, is to disrupt this creeping normalization between Israel and Saudi. And pictures of what seems to be either a disproportionate or illegal collective punishment, collective response, that's going to harden attitudes in a variety of Arab countries and make it much harder for those governments to reach the kind of accord that they actually want with Israel. And as you noted, in Western Europe, where governments have put out very strong messages of support for Israel, there are people on the streets who are already mobilizing. So the images that come out are going to be very powerful.
But is this quest to paint now, in this advanced stage of the campaign, Israel as the villain a legitimate one, Professor Ladwig?
It seems to be, at least as far as I can read here in London, to be put forth by groups that have been found in the past to be sympathetic to, the Syrian government, that have links to the Russian government and so forth. So I think there are a lot of questions about their authenticity.
And remember, viewers, that the Syrian governments or the Russian governments aren't, they've crossed borders several times, as we know, viewers, and they've taken out legitimate and also, of course, civilian targets across borders on several occasions. So there are no angels here.